This is Next Future Today with your host, Dan Keldsen. After a long hiatus in podcasting, he's back. Today's episode kicks us off with an interview of Chris Dyer, founder and CEO of PeopleG2, a fully remote organization. PeopleG2 is routinely ranked one of the best places to work and has been listed as one of Inc.'s 5,000 fastest growing companies 5 times. Countless companies have unlocked productivity, performance, and profits by implementing the strategies from Chris's talks, webinars, and books. Speaking of books, his first, The Power of Company Culture, was a bestseller, and his second, Remote Work, includes a foreword by none other than Marshall Goldsmith. And remote work is the topic of this interview, so let's get to it.
All right. So, welcome to the show, Chris. We've been working on lining this up for a bit now for reasons I won't go into, but what a relief. Here we are. We're finally a chance to talk.
Hooray. Thanks for having me, Dan.
Yeah. Let me bring some applause to this.
There we go. Always need that. Just keep it coming. Just
There you go. I should have an endless loop on that. I need a second button for that. So today we're going to be talking about primarily your book, Remote Work, which, let's see if the autofocus catches up. There we go.
There we go.
So as you can see, maybe it's fairly heavily dog-eared. Autofocus maybe is not quite so good, but trust me, lots and lots of pages dog-eared. It's got some heft to it. So maybe if you have employees who don't like remote working, you can throw it at them. Then it'll get them back in line. I don't know.
It's always good for a good doorstop, whatever you need. It does have a little bit of weight to it.
There you go. Yeah, if you're on a yacht somewhere trying to escape the pandemic and you need it to keep your napkins from flying away, you can put it down there. It's all good. So we'll talk about the contents of the book and remote work today versus 5, 10, 20, 30 years ago. But because you're an author and you're a leader and I'm an author as well, and I have a love of words, one of the things that I want to talk to you about is the writing process that went into writing this book, because I think that's a skill that is not appreciated necessarily, and I want to make sure that people have a chance to learn something that at least jumped out to me, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
All right.
So,
cool.
you want me to go into that now?
Well, let me key things up and we'll see if I'm curious. I'm always curious, how,
Sure.
where our paths overlap, sort of. So, are you familiar with a book called Made to Stick by the Heath brothers?
I'm familiar with it. I have not read it, though. I think it might be on one of my lists of books to read.
Okay. Yeah, no worries. My list of books to read includes covering my entire piano upstairs with a whole bunch of books that I need to read. So, Made to Stick, I believe, was their first book, Chip and Dan Heath. I don't know if Dan goes first or Chris or Chip does, but whatever. But the key concept there is that you can make things, you can write things, you can deliver things, you can create an experience that is sort of instantly forgettable or relatively quickly forgettable, or that is made to stick. And they have a whole bunch of things that go into that. To me, one of the things that I appreciate, because I do read a ton of books, that's why I've done podcasting off and on since 2006, is some books, it's not just the content itself, the raw content that's great, but it's how it's written, so that I'm still talking about Made to Stick 15 years after they wrote the book. I mean, that's a great example. So when you're writing, do you think about, how do I make sure that this isn't just I'm conveying information and it may get received or not? How do I make sure that it gets into somebody's head? Is that a conscious process? Did you work through that, or how did that come about?
Yeah. So, when I wrote my first book, I did it by myself and I hated the process. In fact, it was so bad. I told everybody, if I ever agree to write another book, please throw me off a bridge. Please, lock me in the garage and turn on the car. Like, do not let me do this again. Like, I hated it that much. But it's because it was so foreign to me. Didn't really have anyone that I could really go after to talk to say, how did you really do this? Or, people would kind of give me this fluffy answer. I didn't really get and I didn't have much time to beg some famous author to be my mentor.
Right.
And so I was really worried about what you were talking about. And then I was also really worried because it was my first book that I didn't want to convey something that wasn't correct. Because it's very easy for us to have these beliefs about what we think is right and what we think is true. And then you can go and start looking at, research and realize that, oh, that's not true. And actually I should be doing this other way, which is much better. So I spent so much time researching and worried about how I was going to deliver the content that I kept catching myself in this big blocks of like being totally unable to write. And I would get distracted, and I already have ADD anyways. And so what I would do is I'm in Southern California, and we have a pretty crappy little track called like the Coastliner or something by Amtrak. And it will go to like Santa Barbara to San Diego. That's all this track does, right? This is
Okay.
And so I would go and get on the train and go down to San Diego and then go up to Santa Barbara and then come back down to Orange County and get off the train. And I would do this on a weekend because I was stuck. I couldn't get off the train. I couldn't drive anywhere. I couldn't do anything for anybody just so I could write. Right? Okay. It was just like, it was the only way, I could just buckle down and really, really write. And there tended to be nobody on the train. It was great. However, for the second book, a totally opposite approach. And I realized what I should have done was really treated this like a Scrum project. Like I'd really take the principles of Agile and Scrum and start with the big things, write them down, put them on sticky notes, and then just take those things and start working them down. And so I had a co-author on this book, and it was really funny because she had written some other small things, but nothing this big. And she kept saying, I think this weekend I'm going to go and try to write. And I would say, no, you're not. And she was like, what do you mean? And I go, we're not ready. Trust me. You're just going to start and you're going to get stuck and you're going to have 1,000 questions and we're not. No, we need to plan more. And so we spent 2 months of getting together twice a week in person, some during the pandemic, some parts we were only on Zoom, and just doing the Zoom. I mean, not Zoom, sorry, sticky notes everywhere. Zoom and sticky notes. Right. To the point that it was so, the details were so methodically put out that we could then move them around and regroup them into areas that made sense, right? So we weren't, doubling something up or talking about something out of order, right? So the order could flow. And then what we did is then when it was time to write, we would go through all of our long set of notes. And I don't know why, but for us, it was so easy to suddenly have stories, right? Now that we knew what was said, all of a sudden it was like, well, I kind of have a story about that time that John and my company did this thing. And it really kind of talks about all these things that we want to get into. And so that was really fascinating for me. And it was like, oh, that's how we should always write a book. So now I'd be happy to write another book because I loved the second time. It was a lot of fun. But I think for anyone who's thinking about writing a book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, you got to really have the details figured out. I always think about J.K. Rowling. She knew how the book was going to start, how Harry Potter was going to start, and she knew how it was going to end. Right? She had a clear, she already knew the ending. Right. And then all the other stuff in the middle, she had to create that world and come up with all that detail and all that. And that, I think any of us could have come up with a great idea and a great ending to a book. I really believe her genius is in all of the details in the world that she created to support that great idea. Right. And that she must have had her own version of sticky notes everywhere across her house. You know what I mean? To keep all that.
Yeah, so, or in her car because she was living out of her car, I think, at the time.
In the beginning, yeah. So, but that was really the difference, and hopefully, if someone's going to write a book, that maybe that'll help them. Right? You got to do more planning than you ever think you need to, and when you think you're done, you probably need to do a few more days. I mean, and get it right. That way, it flows.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so I've only written one book so far. I co-wrote it, and thankfully it was with my my business partner. So, and at this point we've worked together for 27 years off and on, And we have similar styles, but also enough differences that it's worth two people writing a book instead of just one person. And we wrote our book in 3 or 4 months, which I've been told afterwards is supposed to be impossible. And I'm glad nobody told me up front, because it felt impossible at the time. But we did up front. Tom had put together a bit of an outline, and that, having any structure whatsoever is a really handy thing. And he had written, I think, 8 books before that. So I had a nice guide for my first time out, but there's a lot of work that goes into it. I want to call out, and I'm just going to read these. So because I studied lyric writing when I was studying songwriting at Berklee College of Music, and I love playing with words anyhow, which is probably why Made to Stick is so memorable for me. Some of the chapter titles that you have, or concepts that you talk about: silver learnings instead of silver linings, old school resistance, and sometimes resistance a good thing? Are you part of the resistance, which is usually like the rebel force, which is often good? I'm wearing a Star Wars t-shirt, so I'm in that sort of frame of mind. Deliberate design, which is interesting because I like phrases like that, where, like, when would you not deliberately design something? Isn't that the point? If it's not designed, then it's not deliberate.
All the time in companies, they don't deliberately design all the time.
I know. Yeah. Well, that's why those kind of nuggets. It's a slightly different way of thinking about it. Can get, crack something through that people have heard for years. As a musician, I've never been in an orchestra, but who's in your orchestra pit? Who's in your band? I like that idea because it's more than just. I'm a big believer in teamwork and collaboration. So that always gets me. Servant leadership or visionary leader, can those be the same thing or not? Mm-hmm. Are they at odds? Whole world. There's a ton of stuff we could talk about. We're not going to, because we could talk forever. Never waste a crisis. So Next Future Today is the name of this podcast. Part of the reason for creating it is, the pandemic was terrible and still is ongoing, and who knows where it's going to end up. But for a lot of companies and a lot of people, it was also a chance to purposely or deliberately design their next future, which I think is, a crisis is often where some amazing innovation comes from. So there's a mixed blessing there. And we're definitely not going to have time to talk about these, but I love, like, Super Goose, Designate the Devil, Cockroach, Ostrich, Tiger Team, Tiger's Den, and the Tsunami, which is an interesting technique that you talk about. So when you were writing, were all these your ideas, or all of Kim's ideas, or did they come fully formed, or did you have to sort of iterate through them?
Yeah. So Kim and I there were a lot of initial ideas that came from Kim. So Kim's really good at being the inventor of things. She's just like a walking, like just dropping little nuggets, right? But she's not very good at then taking that and turning it into like a more systematic thing. And that's where I come in. So I'm more the ideator.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
She originally came up with the concept of cockroach meetings. But she would bring her team together and they would chant, "We're going to kill the cockroaches," right? And she had this whole thing, and it was like they were going to get the problems. And I reinvented it to, no, this is how we have a very quick meeting, 7-8 minutes, no more than 15 minutes. How do we have a meeting that has no bureaucracy, no hierarchy? Just who do I need to help me really quick, right? If you walk into the bathroom and your intent is to use the restroom, you have a need, but there's a cockroach sitting there, and you're like, well, I got to clean up this cockroach first, or I got to get someone to clean it up for me if I'm weirded out by bugs. I got to get this small issue fixed before I can go do the bigger thing I want to do, right? And so I sort of took her idea, and we expanded, and now we've used that and brought that to big companies and lots of places where that's just really turned into a good thing. So she's good at, like, coming up with that. There's plenty that I've come up with, but I think what we found was that you gotta have a word or a name or something that people remember. And this is why we have cockroach meetings, ostrich meetings, tiger team meetings, tsunami planning meetings, because and to your point about the book about helping people remember, I'm a big believer, and I love the book The Art of Gathering, which is all about curating the right experience for people. So if you create the right experience, people know how to act, what to do, when it starts, when they get to go, what is their commitment. And when they know that, they show up and they participate wholeheartedly. When they don't know, they have anxiety, they avoid it, they come in nervous, your meeting is terrible. Am I going to be here 30 minutes or am I going to be here for all day? Do you want me to argue with you? Is this a collaborative meeting or am I supposed to just shut up and learn? Like, what am I supposed to do here as this employee in the middle? And you've got to get really, really intentional with them. So, I know if you call me to a Cockroach meeting, I'm not going to be more than 15 minutes. I'm just helping you solve one issue. We're not going to add on 9 other things to the agenda. Right? You're not going to suck the life out of me out of turning this into an hour-long meeting or a coaching session or something, right? It's just, I got this problem. Who can help me? Right? And that's super important for us to collaborate and move. And I've been kind of causing some controversy in the leadership space around remote work in telling people, if you work remote, hybrid, or flexible, you cannot have one-on-one meetings. You've got to stop having them. Now, of course, there are these tiny little, examples of maybe when you do exceptions, right? But like for the most part, stop having them. Because either someone is just trying to suck time out of you because they want to suck up to you, or it's politics or whatever, right? And they want to complain about someone, you don't need that. Or you have 5 people on your senior team and you have an hour-long meeting with all 5 of them during the week, and they all have a meeting with each other for 1 hour during the week. How many hours? That is insane. Like 25. Am I doing my math right? It's like 25 hours of time. Get everyone together.
Probably,
Do an hour meeting together. And why not talk and argue and discuss all the same issues at the same time? Have 2 of those a week if you need it. I mean, you're still saving an incredible amount of time. And you would think people would know that. And yet I keep being asked to consult in organizations that say, we're getting killed. We're having way too many meetings. We don't know what to do. And I go, and that's the first thing I ask. Well, how many one-on-ones do you have? Oh, I probably have like 20 one-on-ones a week. Huh?
A week? Wow.
I'm like, are you kidding me? When do you do your work? And they're like, at night.
Yeah.
So,
God.
You have to read. This is a Kim saying, design what you want or deal with what you get. And that is a fantastic thing to remember for people. If you don't like what's happening right now, it's a design issue.
Right. Yeah. And your implementation is, if it's just like everything, garbage in, garbage out. If you didn't think about it too much, no wonder you're in a world of hurt. Yeah. I was I was consulting to a Fortune 50 company a number of years ago, and I was getting paid handsomely to be there all the time and basically watch a whole lot of people have meetings all day long. And eventually I just told the sponsor, I can't do this. I can't sit here and I like the money and all, but I have other things I could do with my life than to watch you have meetings and never do anything. So I walked away from that gig. And in hindsight, I had some lean years since then. Maybe I shouldn't have said no to that anymore. Yeah. But meetings.
Yeah, well,
are terrible.
Life's too short to be doing something you don't like or you're not passionate about. I mean, it's
exactly.
It's super important. It's super important.
So let's talk. So another thing I like that so you had a purpose in how you phrase things so that there's a chance that it's going to stick. Grab the PDF summary of Made to Stick. You probably already know all this stuff, but they have some wonderful examples in there that might help you even more, or anybody listening. One of the things that I say about myself is I'm an ex-paranoid information security guy, cybersecurity guy, because I realized that the technology could also do way more damage than it could prevent things potentially. And if you stop people from doing work, then why did you hire them in the first place? Because you can go really crazy with some security things. And that's part of a bigger mindset where I used to be I'll just say that I was a bad IT guy. That was my first step into my career. And I thought my users were stupid and I didn't know what they did and how come they don't know how to turn the computer on and off. Super unhealthy. Thank God within like the first 3 months, I was like, that's awfully negative. I should not do that. What do we do for a business anyhow? How can I help you? What are you looking for? What do we need to anticipate? And I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't done that. What I like about your book is that it's not all about technology. I'd say the book's maybe 5% about technology. It's really not about technology at all necessarily. So did you have to force yourself to think that way, or is that the way that both you and Kim already thought anyhow, and it's just you're exposing it through the book like this, or how did you come to this?
Yeah, I think there was 2 parts to that. One, technology changes so much and so frequently that to put too much in there would really make the book outdated very quickly, right? I mean, who knows if Salesforce will change Slack's name here any moment and call it SalesLick or something. So who knows? Like, so if you put too much of that in there, you can kind of, date your book. But I think most importantly, though, is that we view the work that we do through the human lens first, and create the systems and the processes and have the right people and all of that. The technology comes in as a part of that, but that's just supposed to help you with whatever you're trying to do. And you have to have the right people and have the right ideas and have the norms and the behaviors and that culture really figured out, or else it doesn't matter what piece of software you buy. I mean, there's a lot of people that have bought some expensive pieces of software that never did anything for them because their people were terrible, their culture sucked, or what, just
Yeah.
Or
maybe the technology sucked.
Well, you know what though? I've seen great companies do some incredible work on really bad technology. You know what I mean?
Yes,
they will not be held down by bad technology. They will find a way around it if they're good. Right. So, I think for a lot of years we had the whatever we could afford, right? As a startup, many years ago, whatever bad piece of software we could afford is what we used to get the job done, and we overcame. So yeah, I think So it was mostly, that's just not how we think about work. Technology is a servant to us to get something done or to help us do something better. So
right. Okay. Yeah, I just think it's, I used to feel like I was the only one that was saying that kind of thing, and it was so lonely. And that's part of how I was transitioning out of enterprise technology and consulting and whatnot, where it was like, here, let's drop in $100 million ERP system, and it's going to take the rest of your lifetime to implement. And most people hate it. It's what a wonderful thing. But, what are we actually trying to solve? And maybe it doesn't have to be so hideously expensive and so complicated. So anybody who's focused more on sort of the fundamentals, I think, is far better off, and then use, like you're saying, to use technology to augment it or to magnify what you're doing.
And now for a quick ad from our sponsor, Plexicam.com, the nearly invisible alternative to tripods and teleprompters. Put an end to screen stare with Plexicam, a modern and nearly invisible tripod alternative. Mount any webcam you have for perfect eye contact with your audience. And look great because you're always making eye contact. Plexicam assembles in minutes, is portable, and is almost invisible. Attach an LED or ring light to improve your video even more. With versions for every monitor and camera combination, you can use Plexicam with laptops as small as 13 inches to displays as big as 65 inches or more. You can even use your full-size mirrorless camera, like a popular Sony 5000 and 6000 series. Plexicam turns any monitor into a teleprompter alternative without requiring special software or a dedicated screen. Plexicam, the clear choice for great connections. And now, back to the interview.
I want to talk about, so I think this leads nicely into the deliberate design idea. So the first company that I created, a consulting company called Information Architected. In hindsight, way too long as a domain name, very hard to type on a smartphone, but this was early days for smartphones.
Right.
But the concept is similar. So I've done a lot of information architecture work. You don't build an architecture for anything in a vacuum. So what is it you're trying to do? So I think it's I think deliberate design would also be a long domain name to type on a smartphone. But as a concept, how is that different than just tackling an issue and running with it? What's the difference between deliberate design and not doing deliberate design?
So a good example of deliberate design is, let's say you have a team that comes together to do we call it a finite job, right? So they're not a team that's going to exist forever. They're going to plan the holiday party. They're going to choose a new CRM, whatever this temporary thing is. Yep. And so what we do is we remind them when they come together, they need to do 3 things first. Before they begin, they need to decide, what does success look like? And actively talk about that amongst themselves. What are the goals? What are we trying to do? What does that look like? I mean, when you said architecture, the first thing I thought of, well, maybe what you're trying to do is build the tallest building, right? Or maybe you're trying to build the strongest building for an earthquake, or maybe trying to design the most beautiful building or the most eco-friendly building. You have a purpose, right? So what does success look like in that? The second question is what does failure look like? If we fail, what will have happened? Maybe we went outside a budget. Maybe the sales team would have hated the CRM we picked. I mean, who has to have buy-in? Like, what are all the ways we could fail so we can avoid them?
Right.
Very deliberately, right?
Right.
And then number 3, and I think this is probably, you could argue they're all just as important, but I think this one is of the most important, is that you need to decide as a group how you're going to deal with conflict.
Okay.
So all of my teams that have ever existed or do exist have a completely different answer to this, right? They all run the gamut. So there is no perfect strategy. It's what does that group of people, those 5 to 7 people, what do they want? Is it democracy? Is it just we vote? Yeah, that's fine as long as you have an odd number of people on your team. Is it we'll all give our opinion, but ultimately allow the team leader to make the final decision, and then we'll go with that? Is it bring in an outside leader to help break the tie or to make the decision because we can't agree? There's lots of different strategies that you can decide on. Is it we will not go forward until we can finally get to an agreement, a majority agreement or something, right? Or we all agree. Right. I don't like that one, but whatever. I've seen them all. And the reason this is so important, and this is also fantastic for anyone who's taking any college courses where they make you do these group projects, you should do this exact same exercise. Because ultimately what happens is there's some disagreement, there's somebody said something to somebody, and now there isn't the code on how we're supposed to deal with this. So instead, people shut down, people start participating, they don't come, they don't help, they get passive aggressive, and you got one person who's like, well, I'll just do all the work, and one person who's mad, and 3 people who are in the middle going, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. This one's mad, this one's doing all the work. I guess I'll just sit here and I'll get an A. And so it's a really, really bad process. But if you have talked about it, like, hey guys, we're not always going to disagree. If we don't disagree, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to call a meeting and we're going to talk about it before we go, okay, cool. We'll go with whatever you say, John. If you're the team leader, we're going to go with whatever you ultimately decide. We just want to make sure we're heard. Okay, cool. Right? And that is an idea of design, deliberate design, right? Mm-hmm. That is a 15-minute conversation by a team. And by the way, Google did a ton of research on what made their team successful. And this essentially was the component. Their best teams did this consistently. There's a lot more in there around psychological safety, and there's some other things. But like as a baseline, their best teams did this, and their worst teams did not. Right. Okay. So that's deliberate design to me, right? It's like, how do we get this team to be successful? Right. Yeah. And again, I love how it's not tied to any particular technology. I haven't talked. Maybe there's a reason I haven't talked to. I had some friends who were really into sort of mediated consensus. I don't know. I forget what they used as a term. It was a terrible term, among other things, which is probably the reason I haven't heard from them lately. But it's what can you do? Can you put some structure into? To your point, there's no perfect structure, and as a continuous improvement guy myself, I already know that anyhow. At the end of this podcast, there's things I'm going to want to do different for the next one that I do, because I sure as hell don't have this down as a, this is boop every time. I'm going to do it exactly this way. But that is interesting. I wonder, is there? So there's a book called Difficult Conversations that's, as far as I know, is not used in organizational settings necessarily. It's usually just interpersonal dynamics. Is that part of what you're pulling from as far as the deliberate design and the sort of approach to connecting a team like that? Yeah, I mean, there's lots of examples of deliberate design. That was just sort of one example. Difficult Conversations certainly is a really good book, and I've seen it in business context. I've seen it in personal context for people. But it's just a matter of what are you willing to live with, right? There's going to be disagreement. Not everyone's going to get their way, but at least getting it out there in the open. What are you willing to live with as a member of this team, right? Because that gets rid of passive aggressive. That gets rid of sabotage. People really will do this really nasty stuff if they feel unheard and unmotivated and whatever, right? Yeah. And that's how. Yeah. I've always been able to go in an organization and like get things done. And I had people say, how did you do that? And I look at them like, I don't know how you did it. Like, I just listened to them, and then like we designed it and we talked about it, and we had, like it wasn't a thing. Like, but I had to kind of go back and deconstruct it. And well, why was that? What was I doing specifically?
Yeah.
I think the meeting types that we mentioned earlier, that's deliberate design, right? How do we meet in different kinds of contexts at different times and different rules and different variations of time? Like, what does that look like, right? Because otherwise you end up on the same 30-minute meeting or the same 1-hour meeting over and over and over and over again, and it's junk.
Right.
Because it doesn't fit the need every time, right? So that's deliberate design.
Yeah. I think that there's an interesting aspect of this potentially is a lot of calendar systems default to 30 minutes or an hour, right? But in Gmail and the Google Workplace or whatever they're calling it today, you can set different defaults so that like the smallest meetings length is 20 minutes or 10 minutes, something like that. And then you have a built-in buffer because there's another devil that can be slayed in every organization. Back-to-back anything is usually not a good thing for thinking. So I like that finally there does seem to be more of a deliberate, whether people use it as that term or not, but a deliberate thought process that they're doing. And should we have weekly check-ins? Because maybe that's not useful. And should they always be an hour or a half hour? Should it have the same people? Should it have a different mix? And there's a ton of great examples that you have in the book. But thank God we're finally getting to that point, because it's just, you can get into this rut of like, oh, great, it's another Friday full of the 4 standard meetings where we never get anything done. And what a tragedy. So I'm wondering, I'd like to, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
Okay. So on the deliberate design front, one thing that I think, so I like to coin my own phrases as well. So sometimes it's called creative destruction in sort of innovation and creativity circles. What about deliberate destruction as a tool in your deliberate design toolkit?
Yeah, so you should always be trying to talk about what's working and figuring out how to do more of that. But you also need to be getting rid of things that aren't working. And sometimes that might be you tried a new piece of technology. Maybe you tried a new we have experimented with a couple other meeting types that just didn't work, and they just didn't fit our need, and we just we got rid of them, right?
Yeah.
I am experimenting with one right now, and it's not official yet, but I'm calling it a cheetah meeting, which is so I do have some direct reports that I don't find that I can get into a lot of team meetings with. And so this is like my bookkeeper. This is my social media person. I have a couple people that just need a little bit of my time. And I know I'm totally against the one-on-ones. I'm trying to figure out if I have to have a one-on-one, can I do it very quickly? So I'm calling this a cheetah, which is like a one-on-one cheetah meeting where we come together. Okay, what are the big things you need help with, resources in 15 minutes? Can you get me where I need to be? And then I can get you help and resources in the organization, right? And we'll plan other larger meetings or whatever we need to do. But this is not let's just come and talk and how are the kids and one-on-one, all that kind of junk. This is this is a flyby, really quick meeting. You need to tell me something. So I don't know if this is going to work or not. I've been experimenting with it. I'm still tinkering. Okay. And I need to get the feedback from my team. Is it working for them? Right? Or they feel like they need, or would I be better off bringing those few people instead of a tiny 15, bring them all together for a 30 and let them all discuss but it's hard because what they're working on is so totally different, right? Like it doesn't make a lot of sense. So anyways, but I think you have to, it always feels like there's sort of a natural, if people like the thing that I've come up with or that they've come up with, there seems to be some bit of fire, some bit of energy, right? A passion around it. Yep. And that seems to be contagious. And if there isn't that there, then I tend to say, let's just dump it. Let's get rid of it, right? So that you should be looking for that. I'm generally happy and excited to have my weekly meeting with my senior group. We call it our Tiger's Den meeting. I'm usually have lots of things to talk about. There's updates. We're going to celebrate some stuff. But if I started feeling like I was not happy going, I would redesign it.
Right.
There has to be good energy for the most part around whatever it is you're doing.
Right.
I'll give you a good example. When I very first went remote in 2009, I thought, well, how are we going to keep everyone connected? How will we know what's going on? And I thought, you know what? I'll do a newsletter every month. And it'll be like a little, what's going on with everybody and all this, right? I thought this would be a good idea.
Right.
And for like 3 months, it was like herding cats trying to get some people to send me or to tell me what was going on with them.
Right, yeah.
I'm like, well, forget this is stupid. So I went back and I figured out, well, we created a water cooler room, and at the time it wasn't Slack, it was HipChat or something else. But, in our little IM program, we created the water cooler room, and I let them do it when they wanted to. And then they took it over, they loved it, and they were doing it, and I had, so the idea was right, the approach was wrong, right? So I had to, there was no energy around it. Nobody wanted to do it. So why am I trying to do it, right?
Yeah. So just because I live in the Boston area, I'm not a Bostonian because I wasn't born here, but I've been here for quite a long time. So a cheetah sounds very much like a Harvard Yard kind of thing. And maybe has the connotation of you're cheating on your one-on-one role.
Oh, all right. Maybe. I was just using cheetah because they're fast. But
I hear you. But multiple meanings. Why not? Cool. So there's a couple of things I want to hit before we sort of run out of the planned time I had anyhow. And again, I just want to say that, I dog-eared a lot of this book. So if you have not read this or listened, is there an audiobook version available?
Not yet. We're waiting for the publisher to make that happen.
That's a different discussion.
That's a sore subject for another time. I'm
on them. Sorry.
We need to get this done. Everyone keeps asking me for it. But yeah, there is Kindle. There is the paperback, or if you're crazy, there's a hardback version. So yeah.
Oh yeah. Wow, that would be much heavier. So there's a couple things that, so the novelty of some of the things that you talk about is fun. You talk about two main working models that at least for me, I jotted down as teams, relationships, and speed, or TRS, versus people, proximity, and bureaucracy. And I hadn't heard of those concepts before. Can you kind of take us through what are those things?
Yeah, so we're big believers in teams. And that comes from our experience, but also comes from Scrum and Agile and a lot of the newer methodologies, I think, that have really helped people be better at work, right? We look at Lean, you look at Kaizen, there's so many things. It's more about teams and moving things quickly, which is different than let's design this big, giant thing that was supposed to work for everybody. This is giant process based on the people. And, let's be right. I mean, it's terrible. You could think of some really big companies that still suffer from this today. And you wonder, why did they go out of business, or why are they struggling, or why, all this stuff. I noticed the best organizations are really decentralized in how they get things done. There are good strategy and planning happening at a very high level, but then they let their groups and their teams go and get the stuff done. And the reason that's important is that I've often told people, you can't treat everyone the same, right? So to try to treat everybody equally is impossible. Not everyone has the same situation. Not everyone's the same gender, has the same sexual identity. Not everyone has the same, is disabled or not disabled. I mean, there's so many variables about human beings that it is impossible to treat them all equally. What I can do is treat them all fairly. And so we can have teams and we can create environments for people where we're fair to them in a way that makes sense for them and their team and the organization, right? So what do I allow somebody who has a wheelchair to do, right? It's going to be different than someone who doesn't need a wheelchair to get to work or to work remotely or to do whatever, right? And I believe that a lot of the really bad processes put in place by these companies is because they're trying to make it all equal. They're trying to make it legally defensible. They're trying to make it no-brainer for all of their leaders. Just implement this thing and it'll all work out fine. You know what I mean? Which means you end up excluding people who don't fit into your little square peg round hole, right? Because we don't have a process for you, right? We can't. And then that's how they get themselves into more trouble, and why they have a lack of diversity in thinking. And, so if we can decentralize as much of this as possible into our teams and allow them to figure out what's the best way for them to work. Google's struggling at this. They're trying really hard. You can see they've been kind of screwing up the whole remote work messaging. However, they've been doing a really good job of creating these like very unique environments for their hybrid groups where their team setup, where that team will be to work in a hybrid, they'll be in and out of the office, is unique to that team and how they want to work and what's needed for them. And also they're thinking about, I don't know if they've done this, even like not quarantine, but like making it like almost a locked group to where they're sort of in a bubble with their coworkers, right? They've been talking about that even. So there's some really interesting ways they've been thinking about how do you customize this environment for this team based on what they need, how they work, what they do. And again, you can be fair to them, but you can't be equal, right, across a company that large. So that's sort of the idea here, is to think about and letting your teams really. What's his name? Marcus Buckingham has had a few books. I think it's The 9 Lies of Work is the one I'm thinking of, where the research showed that if you look at how people thought about their team, right, they asked them, how do you like your boss? How do you like your team? Are you happy with them? All those scores directly correlated to how do you like your company? How do you think, what's your, do you have faith in the CEO and all that? It was almost exactly parallel, which meant how you think about your team, the people you work with most on a regular basis, is actually how you think about your company.
Yeah.
Right? You got a good boss, you love your job, you love your company. You got a bad boss, I hate my company, I hate my team, I'm going to leave. Right? You have really bad team members. It's all connected. So worry about the team experience. Worry about that. It will take care of everything else for you.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's funny. I mean, when you have control over something that is more self-contained, then you can do more. So it makes sense that if you can make that change happen there, especially if you're a leader of some kind, that's a great place to put your leverage. Why not, instead of trying to move the entire organization? And
you can have your values on the wall to say, we have these 5 values that as a big company are important to us, right? And then you teach that to your leaders and say, these 5 things are important to us. Now, go figure out how to make those important inside of your team in your own way, right? And you should guide your decisions and your principles based on these things, but you can still internalize it into your own unique, special way that feels unique and special, right? And that's what's important. It's not we care about X, Y, and Z, but then this group over here is just like totally ignoring all that. We don't mean that. Autonomy has its limits, right? There is some structure to what autonomy is, but inside of that, let them play with it.
Yeah. How about structured autonomy?
Yeah.
So that's funny. So it ties in nicely to another piece I wanted to talk about. I think you talk about pods in your book. I could be totally making that up, but is that true? Okay.
Yeah.
Because I've heard that from a number of different areas.
Yeah. Kim loves to call them pods. I always call them teams. So she had pods, which were groups of people who did work together, right?
Yep.
But they may not be on the same quote unquote team. So for her, a pod could be a larger group. To me, there are teams, and we call them infinite teams and finite teams. So I just like the word team better than pod and whatever. You can call it whatever you want. But if you're on the sales team, you could have a bigger group. You could have more people on your sales team that is actually reasonable to have meetings with. So you, as the sales leader, you could have 25 people on your sales team, but then you might need to break them up into smaller pods or smaller teams. You may have the West Coast division, the East Coast division, the Midwest, and then inside that group, you're going to have to then manage them in much more, easier ways. You're going to have 5 to 7 people, and you can work with them, right? Because you can't have 25 people on a call and it's not a call anymore. It's not a meeting. It's a webinar. You just can't have, and I see this, like they'll bring all 25 people and then you expect people to be able to talk and get stuff. No, that's when you just share, okay, guys and gals, we've got this new product. I'm going to teach you all about it in this meeting. And then you break down in your smaller groups, and that's where you can have the real dialogue and questions and feedback. But so for us, that's infinite and finite. For her, it was pods and teams. So it's just a matter of wording.
So as far as what makes a pod or this kind of definition of a team different than the way that teams might have been assembled in the past? What's the sort of the unique characteristics of this?
I think it's breaking it down to the 5 to 7 people. So there's tons of research. There's some great books out there. Team Genius is one. I think it was written by the former CHRO of Google. There's some other
Laszlo?
Laszlo, thank you. There's more anthropological books that I've read. I'm forgetting his name. It's kind of hard to say, but Sapiens was the book. And it talks about, there's a lot of really unique knowledge around how we as human beings want to group up and not group up. So what we've seen from an anthropological setting is that when you get to about 150 people, the tribe can no longer really exist beyond that. So as soon as it starts to get above 150 people, at some point there's a split.
Yep.
We see companies actually design their factories this way. When they get to 150 people at the factory, they have to open a new factory. And the reason for that is you can't remember everyone's name. You can remember 150 people's names and who does what and where do you go for this thing and who handles that. But when you get above that, it gets to be, you can't do it. As a human, we cannot, and we also can't care about more. If you think about it, it's really hard to care for more than 50 people in your life. Like really deeply care, like people who you would go to the hospital. If they were in the hospital, you would go to the room to visit them. It's like 50.
Right.
You know? And there's 150 you might like send a card to or care about or go to a funeral of someone. Right. There's limits to our capacity to be connected to people, despite our ability to want to do more. So you have to think about that for divisions of companies and structures of things. But also we get down to that teams really cannot be effective if there's less than 5 people or more than 7. The magic, I think the perfect number is 5. I'll tolerate 6. 7's fine. But you give me 8 or you give me 4, and there's always problems. Not fast enough or not fast enough. They both seem broken.
Right.
And
you
this
need
is
a different
all
gas
just
pedal.
right. Well, with 4, it's like there's not enough people to do all the work. And with 8 or 9, there's too many voices, and it's too much conversation and too much deliberation, and we don't get anything done. So if you think about this, this is not a new leadership phenomenon. This is not the latest thing that somebody studied. This is just old school, like your families. Families were in groups probably of 5 to 7 at most. That's all you could feed. That's all you could care for. That's all you could stand to live with, right? Your larger network is about... And they kept you alive, and they gave you stuff back. Your larger network is 50, and you needed them to trade with and to help you. And if you got sick, and help you build a house or a roof, or right. And then 150 was your larger group that would help you keep safe and commerce and all this sort of thing. But beyond that, so if your company's struggling, if you went from 150, now you're at 250 people, and you're like, why? We can't communicate. We're struggling. Yeah, I can tell you exactly why. You need to break those people out into groups of 100. And have them stop trying to talk to 250 people. It just doesn't work.
Right. Yeah. Especially if you treat them all the same, which I totally agree with. So we're running out of time. So I wanted to ask you 2 sort of ending questions. If you suddenly had an extra $1 million budget to spend on your business, how would you spend it and why? This is unanticipated budget.
Unanticipated. So I actually love this question because I actually give this to my staff once a year, once every other year. I ask them this question: if I gave you $1 million to spend on the company, how would you spend it? And you would think most of the time that they would say, well, we're going to give everyone bonuses, or we're going to give everyone money, or whatever. And usually what they end up doing is coming up with like 20 awesome ideas, 19 of which cost no money, right? Cost no money at all.
Right.
I do think for me though, I would consider for $1 million, I might spend more on marketing, or I might just go try to buy another company just to kind of add some scalable growth. Because a lot of the best stuff we've ever done is free, right? I don't know if I had $1 million and I went and added a bunch of employees. Well, I'm not going to have the money next year to keep them going. Right. I need the money has to be something that can be sustainable for us. And
okay.
And maybe if I didn't do that, then I might put it in a fund and use it for rainy days for employees. People who have hardships or have kids have surgeries or parents are sick. I mean, we've had a lot of that kind of stuff, and I've always wished we could do a little bit more to help them. So that might be a good thing too.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's I've actually been hearing that more and more recently. So that's interesting. Maybe we're putting some humanity back into the workplace. That should be a lovely thing. So, I mean, you sort of took away the firepower of my follow-on question, which is if you didn't have that $1 million, but you still wanted the same kind of outcome, what would you do?
Yeah. I would ask my people, they always have the best ideas. Yeah. So it's just permission to say them out loud at that point, really. And then you decide if you're going to do them or not. Okay. Sometimes it's just the space. Sometimes employees just need the permission and the space to think that way, right? That, hey, we want you to stop and use this other part of your brain, right? And we're all going to do it, and there's no wrong answers, and no one's going to laugh at you. And this is just, what other crazy ideas? What could we? And people just start throwing them out, right? And that is contagious. That's how innovation and organizations need to happen. Is you have to have a place where people can talk about these things. This is also why I'm a big advocate for transparency. If we don't tell people what we know and we don't share with them what we're working on, what our goals are, what our P&L looks like, right? What challenges are we having inside different industries? Where are we doing well? Then they don't have the information they need to have good ideas to give to us on how we can do better.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's awesome. I mean, it feels to me like you have a much more participative approach to how do you build teams, how do you build organizations, there's a bunch of stuff that I'd hoped we would get to, but we won't this time, about how do you leverage strengths and weaknesses and potentially round out who you're hiring for culture fit versus culture add. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I think we could have fun with, but we'll save that for another time. Maybe a version 2 of your book, we can come around to that.
Sounds good.
All right, Chris. Well, thanks. I'm so glad we finally had a chance to make this happen. It was great to talk to you. I love talking to people that have gone through the trying experience of writing a book. And I think there's a ton of great information in there. And I've really loved talking to you today. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Dan.